Yeah.
He's going. I guess we're going. Okay, so in one of the videos, you can hear, and this is a video with Pete and Dan Love talking, you can hear Love say, when people incite violent action or incite other people to do violent action, then they can be prosecuted. And he's saying this to Mel Bundy. I think this is huge because that may be true, but there was no violent action. So I thought that that was a good thing for us.
Dan Love also, in that recording, he was talking to Pete Santilli, he was talking to Mel Bundy, and he mentioned, he said, Dan Love, he sounds reasonable in the video. He says, you have rights, Second Amendment, we don't have any problem with firearms, but then he turns around and he talks about, but the militia. He says, when you have militia, that is where, violence can be incited. And he kind of tied militia with the idea that that would be something that would raise a threat. And that's a problem for me because there's absolutely nothing wrong. Statutorily, militias exist in the continental United States, and in most states there's statutory code for the, for organized and unorganized militia. So there's nothing unlawful about being in a militia. There's nothing unlawful about being in a militia and going to a protest. There's nothing unlawful about being in a militia, going to a protest, and being in lawful possession of firearms. At least it shouldn't be, but according to Daniel P. Love and the BLM, that is something that would raise their threat assessment and something that could potentially incite violence.
From the video with Pete and Mel, the officer says he thought Pete and Mel being together means they knew each other. And he came to that conclusion because they were working together. On April 9th, they said they received bolos on individuals who were armed and dangerous coming into the Bundy Ranch or into, their area. And
those two people were never identified. There were never any details given about this report, bolo, be on the lookout. Two armed, violent individuals. We never got any details about what that threat report was.
I think what this is leading up to is they're saying, oh, there was a threat here. I think at one point in court yesterday, somebody said something about a bomb threat on a hotel, but that was stricken off of the record right away. So I believe what they're trying to do is they're trying to be like, okay, well, we came with so much force because of all these threats, because of all of these things that were happening. Well, when we go into the cross-examination, Jess brings up the fact that here this gentleman admits that he was working 28 hours without sleep. And, at the end of his testimony, he was in fear for his life. He was in fear for the life of the other agents around him. He even goes to say that after the 12th, after, he took his week off and went back to ranger duty, he was still in fear for his life because people wouldn't respect his authority. And at one point he had to go and talk to some camper, and he was in fear of doing that. It was like his first ever patrol stop, shall we say, because of this situation. And Jess brings up, well, were you in fear on the 11th? Because they keep bringing up the 11th and these bolos, and he said, were you in fear of your life then on the 11th? And he said, well, yeah, he was in fear of his life on the 11th. So that goes to show that they could possibly have been in fear, not because of the protesters, but because of, let's say, Dan Love and all of the false information he was putting in, or the situations, the working conditions that he was having the entire team work in. Because as we know now, on the night of the 11th, everyone who was working was made to stay and continue working up until the 12th, and the situation happened that way.
So, BLM agent Logan Briscoe, that's who was on the stand most of today, he reported that Pete Santilli, and we talked about this earlier, Pete Santilli had ratcheted up some rhetoric, talking about people showing up, people potentially coming with weapons. In cross-examine, Eric Parker's attorney, Jess Marchese, points out the fact that in his memo of activity from the 11th, there was never any mention of any inflammatory rhetoric from Pete Santilli. It didn't happen. It was not in his memo of activity, and it was never mentioned as a good reason to raise his threat assessment at the time. So during cross-examine, Jess Marchese did a fantastic job of making sure that he was discredited for that because they come to, and this has happened a couple times, they come to testify, and we later find out that what they're saying on the stand about being in fear, and in this case about Pete Santilli ratcheting up rhetoric, that did not in fact land in any of his reports from the 11th that day.
There was also talk of a person in an SUV pulling down to Post 1, which is the entrance into their area, pulling around his vehicle, around the water barriers and parking. And he then says that he tried on his loudspeaker to tell the gentleman to go away, to tell him they were in a closure area, and the person did not leave. It's a woman, and it's a silver SUV. In cross-examination, he was asked if anyone actually went up to the vehicle and said anything. That person was not identified. We don't know who they were, but that was also one of the things he said he used to increase the threat level or made him fear.
Briscoe specifically said that that vehicle pulling into post number 1 elevated his threat assessment because he said this SUV, we never found out who drove it, we never found out who the occupants were, they never even got out of the car. All they did was pull into the area, and he said, well, it could have impeded our egress if we had to get out. And what come to find out that he said that car pulled into post number 1, created a situation where he believed that none of the protesters would act lawfully at that point. He basically said that his threat assessment at that point elevated because a car pulled into the post, it refused to leave, and that reflected on the rest of the entire protest. Also, Las Vegas Metro showed up at this time. This is about 11:30 in the morning on the 12th. Las Vegas Metro pulls up and they walk up to him and they say, we need you to put away your long guns. You need to put away your long guns. And he was asked, did you do that? And his answer was no, we did not do that. They ignored the request of Las Vegas Metro to put away their long guns. They then took their long guns down to post number 2, down under the wash, where the rest of the protest transpired.
They also, in that questioning, he was asked if the reason that he didn't listen is because Metro didn't have authority over him, and he said yes, that's true.
So when we walked back in from lunch, one of the first things that Gloria Navarro referenced was the assault on the 12th. She called it the assault on the 12th, and a couple minutes later, Nadia Ahmed, in her direct examination of their witness, called it, during an objection, she called it the assault on the officers. And to me that says that I'm assuming that the U.S. attorneys have a job to prove guilt, but the judge sitting on the bench should not have the presumption of guilt, and that's exactly what's happening. They can't call it a protest, but the government can call it an assault. They're allowed to reference it as a standoff, but no one is allowed on the defendant's side to call it a protest. To me, there's a presumption of guilt coming from the bench.
I think that's it. That's all we got. We ended with they were pulling in a new video. This was being pulled in by Tomasi, Stephen Stewart's lawyer, and this is in cross-examination. So we're hoping, it's a long video, and she was already planning on quitting at 3 today. So we're done for the day, and that's where we'll pick up in a week because there is no court next week. So here we have started our first week of trial, and we've already got a week off.
8 o'clock on February 28th.
8 o'clock on February 28th. If you're curious about all this, you can head over to bundyranchstandoff.info. We got a lot of updates. We got a lot of information out there. We'll put some more up, but on the 28th, we're going to come back with cross-examination of Logan Briscoe, and that's where we stand right now. Now is a good time. We've got it all over Facebook. These guys are going to sit in Henderson for another week and wait to go to trial. Go out and buy a stamp for 49 cents, however much it costs. Put something in the mail and send these guys a note of encouragement. You don't need an inmate number, you just need the address of the Henderson Detention Center. We'll put it in the comments of this live feed. Put a stamp on something and send them a quick note. That would do a lot to help them out, lift their spirits.
Thank you all. See you next time.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.